We're doing a study on what we call romance and redemption. We're looking at the book of Ruth, and your syllabus on the book of Ruth on romance and redemption is tremendous study that every Christian needs. This is kind of like foundation, basic. Everybody needs it. We come to lesson number 3, and this lesson I'm calling it a loving leader. A loving leader. And I'm going to do a contrast here with Elimelech, what he did and why he did it, and what he should have done to have been a loving leader. The first blank in your notes there is the one word that makes the difference between a dictator and a director is the word love. It's the only thing that makes the difference. You can't make enough rules. You can't, watch someone 24 hours a day. No. Love must be the guiding principle in our life. Walk in love, just as Jesus Christ did that for you and I. So one of the great cries in our world today is a cry for leadership. Everybody seems to recognize that we need a leader. We need good leaders. We need somebody that can help us to come up with the right decisions. And what I've discovered is so many people, they're smart, but they're not wise. They make decisions only based on the temporary situation, not looking where it's going to lead them tomorrow, what's going to happen down the road. So this is Elimelech. Elimelech's decision to go to Moab was a bad decision. And we see that by the end result. What happened? If Elimelech would have only known what was going to happen, I can assure you, he would have done something different. He would not have done that because it ended so tragically for him and his family. So the first part of this lesson, I'm going to talk about leading the wrong way. The wrong way for us to lead as leaders. Number 1, stop living for the temporary and start living for eternity. Live for the eternal things. That is so important as a Christian that you learn to do that. So many people right now, they just look at their situation and say, well, this is best for us right now. In other words, it's like the book of Judges, what's right in their own eyes. But they're not looking at the eternal result of that, where it's going to lead them eventually. I look at my own personal family, and just what a tragedy that happened to my brother that grew up in the same church that I did. But I think part of it was sibling rivalry. I was the preacher, and since I was the preacher, he was going to do it the other way. So he leaves God out, he leaves church out. It did not end the right way for him. So don't live for the temporary. Learn to live for the eternal. Because what you're going to discover is the temporary has a way of becoming the permanent. This was Elimelech's decision. He was going to go for just a short time to Moab. Now, there is nothing in the story that indicates that he prayed about the decision. He makes the decision based on, we don't have anything to eat here. I hear there's some good opportunities over in Moab. He doesn't care that Moab is a godless place, that they worship idols there, that he doesn't care about that being a sinful place. And I've seen people make that decision many times in my lifetime. I'm going to make more money if I go over here and take this job. So they will uproot their family, take them from one good church to where there is no church, just so they can make money. As someone has said, they make so much money that it doesn't make sense. And that is the truth. They're living for the wrong thing. Looking at this story in the book of Ruth, he starts out by talking about the word dwell. Now, the older translations, such as the King James, use the word sojourn here. And even though that's a word that we don't use anymore, I never hear anybody going around saying, well, I'm going to sojourn today. We don't talk that way anymore. It's changed. But it was a good translation in the sense that it showed the distinction between remaining or abiding and spending a short time, because that's what the word meant. This first word is a completely different word than the word remained. The first word means to stay for a short time, to stay temporary. But as I just said, if we're not careful, the temporary becomes the permanent. And it did for Elimelech. It ended up in a graveyard. So what he intended to just stay for a few days turns into about 10 years that they're living in Moab. Now, what's happened is Moab has become home to them. This is what I see happens in the lives of a lot of people, that when they make the decision that they're going to marry someone that is not a Christian, they're not looking at the end result. Or they make the decision that I'm going to leave this church. Oh, I know this is a great church and great opportunities, but I'm going to go over here and make some money. And after I make the money, then I'm going to. They're not looking at the long-term result. They're only thinking about the temporary right now. Moab had become home to them, and what Moab promised to them turned into a lie because it ended in death. That's not a good promise. It was a tragedy for them. So they left Bethlehem to escape a famine, and soon Elimelech and his sons are dead in Moab. They only intended to just stay for a few days, but they never returned home again. Now, I hope you're listening closely to me here, because I've seen this happen in too many people's lives. And they make these temporary decisions that end up having eternal consequences in their life, in their families, because they lived the wrong way. And that's what happens for Elimelech. His story ends in Moab at a cemetery. He never got back home again. He was never buried with his fathers. No, he dies in a foreign land as a stranger. What a tragedy. That's the wrong way to lead, the wrong way to lead. Now, the second thing that I want to talk about of Elimelech is what I'm going to call get rid of your bitterness. Get rid of your bitterness. Now, bitterness basically comes from negative things that we experience in life that become a bitter pill for us to swallow. They're just bad things that happen. It's going to happen to every one of us, because I've already pointed out, this is not heaven. Not everybody's going to be nice to you. Some people are going to do you wrong. You've got to determine, what am I going to do? You've got to forgive them. Let it go. If you don't let it go, you hold on to it. It becomes a defining moment in your life, and you end up becoming like the people you don't like. And that is a tragedy. Elimelech must have been bitter because of the names that he gives to his boys. His boys. All of these words have meaning. And for instance, he has two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. The name Mahlon means sickly. The word Chilion means wasting away. In other words, he's gradually dying. Now, I know there are people that want to debate this. I've had them, want to argue this point with me, because they say, well, maybe that's the reason that he left. His boys are sickly, and so he is leaving. And I really don't think that is true. First of all, how do you tell a baby is pining away when it's just been born? How can you tell that it's sickly when it has just been born? No, that's when they named the children. It's when they were born. I think it shows something that's wrong in the heart of Elimelech. Bitterness. And the second reason that I believe this is because we know from the story the boys were healthy enough that they grew up to be young men and got married in Moab. So they were strong enough that they lived for many years and got married. No, I think it shows something has happened to Elimelech. I believe that Elimelech, he is already backslidden in his heart, and that his feet have simply followed his heart in going to Moab, going the wrong way. Now, God help us to understand this, because if we're not careful here, negative things will happen. For instance, when I wrote my autobiography, which I call Living the Dream, I intentionally left out quite a few negative things that happened to me over life. And I put in the preface of the book, some things should have never happened the first time, let alone be repeated. I believe that. I believe that. I'm not going to put my focus in life on the bad things that happened to me. I'm going to focus on the good things. Now, you've got the same choice. Do you want to focus on the problem, or do you want to focus on the promise? Do you want to focus on the past, or do you want to focus on your future? The choice is yours. Elimelech is making a tragic mistake, and I think it comes out of bitterness that's in his own heart, that he's blaming God for his troubles, that God has disappointed him, God has failed him, that the church is just a bunch of hypocrites. We all hear these stories over and over and over again, but it's the wrong way to lead. Forgive the past, or you have chained yourself to the past. You got to let it go. One of the best stories I ever heard concerning this on forgiveness was a young woman in the state of California that was kidnapped and raped by this young man. They caught the young man. They brought him to trial. In the trial, the defense attorney for the young man asked the young woman, "Have you forgiven my client for what he did to you?" And she said, "Yes, I have forgiven him." "How can you do such a thing? How can you forgive him?" And her statement, her answer was classic. She said, "This young man took one night out of my life. I refuse to give him any more." Boy, that is powerful, because that's what forgiveness does. Forgiveness doesn't change the guilty party. Forgiveness, they're still going to stand before God. They're still going to answer for their crime. What forgiveness does, it sets you free. That's what Elimelech failed to do, and it's what creates this problem. Then the third thing that I see as a mistake in Elimelech's life is what I call stop turning to the world for help. Stop thinking that the world is going to be your answer. See, when you look at the end of the story, when Elimelech died, his sons did not return to Bethlehem. Why didn't they go? Why didn't they go back home? Why didn't they return back again? They were simply following their father's example. Now, I know I've heard people say this, "Don't do what I am doing, do what I tell you to do." That doesn't work. That doesn't work at all. Because what you are doing is painting a mental picture in the minds of those that are following you. In this case, it's his sons, his own children, that are following his bad example. And they end up dying in Moab just like their daddy did. It's a terrible thing. Now, another thing we discover when we read the Word of God, it was not God's will for these Jewish boys to be marrying Moabite girls. It wasn't God's will. And when you go back and you study the story, you find out why. Back in the book of Numbers, in Numbers, the 25th chapter, it's really a very tragic story, a very sad story. It's during the days of Moses. This is long before Elimelech and his sons. But during the time of Moses, there are these Moabite women that are coming in, seducing the Israelite men to come to their what we would call witchcraft, idolatrous parties. They called it worshiping their gods. But in worshiping their gods, they did it with all the drinking, the dancing, the immorality. It was all a part of the snare. And so these Moabite women are coming and enticing them to come to their drunken parties and drunken orgies. And it's a sad story, but it ends with not only a battle with Moab and many people dying and losing their lives there, but a curse that was placed upon Moab because of what they'd done. And they said, don't allow them to enter into the assembly of the Jews. So it's based upon that. But Mahlon and Chilion, they make the decision like their father had made, based on the temporary instead of the eternal, and marry these Moabite girls. And so they end up, both of them, dying early deaths in Moab. I do not believe that was God's will. I do not believe it was God's purpose for them. I believe they made a bad decision and reaped the result of that. When you look at Naomi, the word Naomi means pleasant. But when she returns back at the end of chapter 1, she returns back to Bethlehem again. When she gets there, here was her statement. Because everybody's saying, it's Naomi. Naomi's come home. It's Naomi. And she said, don't call me Naomi. Because the word means pleasant. She says, call me Mara. Mara. And we get a name that we use that comes from that same root word, Mary. Mary comes from this same word as Mara. I find it very interesting that Mary was the name of the mother of Jesus. See how God can take bad situations, negative situations, and turn it into something that is good. But you see what's happened to this woman now. Naomi, the pleasant one, has become bitter, just like her husband. No doubt just like her boys. What is she doing? She is blaming God for the result of their bad decision. They never consulted with God, never prayed about it, never sought God. They made the decision based on a temporary solution. Now they're blaming God for their bad decisions. It's what a tragedy. What a tragedy. I see this as the way the world lives. I don't want to live that way. I don't want to go that way. Now let me talk about in the second part of this lesson what I'm going to call leading the right way. Leading the right way. The wrong way is what Elimelech did. He took his family down the wrong path. It did not turn out good. The right way. Number one, learn that we must earn respect. Now, this is one of the values in my life. This is one of the things that I live by. It means so much to me. I want the people that know me the best to respect me the most. You don't know me. I want your respect, but you don't know me. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know. My family does. I want my family to respect me the most because they know me the best. You have to earn that. Or another way of saying it is, respect must be commanded, not demanded. You can't go around and say, you've got to respect me because I am. No, that's not the way it works. It's commanded by the way you live, who you are, that as they get to know you. See, I remember years ago, because I grew up in church, and I remember hearing preachers talk, and they were talking about keep the people at a distance from you. Don't let anybody get close to you, because the closer they get to you, the less respect they have for you. Now, I understand the principle. You can't be everybody's friend, I understand that. But the closer they get, the less respect they have for you. And I heard that statement several times from pulpits. And then one day, suddenly I connected the dots. Wait a minute. That's not the way it is with Jesus. The closer I get to Jesus, the greater respect I have for him. Why? Because he is who he says he is. He will do what he says he will do. And the closer I get to him, the greater respect I have for him. And so I realize the reason that some people lose respect for you when they get close to you is because they see you say one thing, but you do something else. Do you understand? Respect must be earned by who you are. It's earned out of your lifestyle. It's earned by that. And so I would encourage you, walk the talk, live it. Don't just talk about it, do it. And people will respect you because of it. The second thing that I see in learning to live the right way is that might is not necessarily right. For instance, I've seen this with fathers and their sons. When the boys are small, particularly when they're little guys, you just point to them and tell them what to do, because after all, it's a giant that's talking to them, and this big giant is telling them, and sure they're going to do it because they don't want to get in trouble with the giant. But as the little guys grow up, one day you're looking at them face to face. You cannot lead them now by saying, I'm the boss. I remember my dad taught me this when I was a young man. He said, son, you see these men go around saying, I'm the boss of my family. I said, don't believe that. That's not true. He said, you don't see bosses going around saying, I'm the boss. No, everybody knows who the boss is. He said, if he was really the boss in his family, he wouldn't have to be telling everybody. That is true. It's really true. See, this thing, you earn the respect, and then you understand, just because I'm bigger, just because I have more money, just because I'm the oldest, it doesn't necessarily mean that I am the wisest, that I'm making the right decision. So you learn the principle here that might is not always right. That sometimes even older Christians can make mistakes. They can do things that they shouldn't be doing, say things that they shouldn't say. Now that should, we should learn, mature, and become fewer and fewer incidents within our lives, but none of us are perfect. And so just because you're put in that position doesn't guarantee that you're always going to make the right decisions. Then the third thing, if we're going to be good leaders, we're going to do it the right way, is learn to submit to proper authority. The truth of it is, we are all listening to someone. Every one of us is. Everybody's listening to somebody. But the problem is, many people are listening to the wrong voices. The wrong voices. Rebellion didn't start with your family and your neighborhood, in your community. No, rebellion is a spiritual problem that began with the devil at the throne of God. There was no sin there other than in Lucifer's heart. That's the only sin. God had done nothing wrong. But rebellion starts in heaven. Now, if it started in heaven, we shouldn't be surprised when we see it here on earth. We shouldn't be surprised when we see it in the church. It happens. There's something about babies when they're born. They're, just these little guys. They are so innocent. They don't know right or wrong. They're just newborn babies, and they are so innocent. But as they begin to grow, learning to walk and learning to talk, what is one of the first words that they learn? About 18 months, 24 months, something like that. Usually, all of a sudden, this little angelic creature that's always done everything that you wanted it to do, Suddenly they stamp their foot on the floor and fire's in their eyes and they say, no. And from that point on, there is a contest of wills that's going on. Every one of us have to deal with it. We're all going to be submitting to someone. As I said, everybody's listening to somebody. The problem is, if you're not careful, you'll listen to the wrong voices. The only cure for rebellion, the only one, is submitting to God's authority. That's the only cure. You're not going to be able to fix it yourself. You're not going to be able to solve it. No, it's submitting to the proper authorities. And this is true in everybody's life. God has put me in a position where I help to oversee hundreds, even thousands of pastors. Even pastors need a pastor. And I have thousands of them that call me pastor. But guess what? Just because I'm a pastor of pastors doesn't mean that I am the boss. I'm not the boss. And that's why I willingly submit myself to my pastor. My son-in-law is now my pastor. Or that, I have to say that often to remind myself, because the rules change. I'm not the pastor now. He is the pastor. And so I submit myself. If I'm not preaching, I go to church and listen to him preach. Why? Even pastors of pastors, need a pastor. We all need to be in submission. And if we're not in submission, it annuls our right to be the authority. Because the only thing that gives us God's authority is when we submit to God. We submit to the authorities that God places within our life. Now, I hope you understand what I'm talking about here, because I see so many people that are in rebellion. How do you know if you are in submission to authority? When the authority asks you to do something you don't want to do. I'm not talking about sin now. I'm not discussing sin. I'm talking about when you attempt to do something and they say, no, I don't think you ought to do it this time. And then you'll find out whether or not you are submitted to authority or not. The truth is, rebellion can be transmitted to our children, and that's what happens with Elimelech. But not only is rebellion transmitted, you can teach them godly submission. You can set that example for them. And so the fourth thing I would like to say is learn to become a loving leader. A loving leader. That is where I think Elimelech failed more than any place else. Elimelech is not thinking about his family when he went to Moab. He's thinking about himself, not thinking of his family. He's not making his decision based on what's best for them. It's what's best for him. If we're going to be loving leaders, we've got to learn to be sacrificial. In other words, not doing what pleases me, but what is best for the church, my family, what's best for the group. That's being a sacrificial leader, where you're willing to give of yourself. That's what Jesus did. That's the example that Jesus set for us when he said, I did not come to serve myself, but I came to serve and to give my life a ransom for many. That's good leadership. That's godly leadership. That's a loving leader. And that's what he did for us. Remember when he said, no man takes my life from me, but I lay it down for my friends. It's because of love that I lay it down. And so this is the test of love. The test of love is basically based on this: how much of myself I'm willing to give to serve others. That's a loving leader. Now, if you want to be in a leadership position in the church, in the kingdom of God, this is the right way to do it. It's following the example of Jesus. John 3:16, again, that classic golden verse of the Bible. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And then Jesus says, because I love my friends, because I love you, I'm giving my life for you. That's a loving leader. A loving leader earns the right to lead because they lead out of decisions that's based on love. And if we will understand the responsibility, and that's where I said Elimelech failed miserably because he's not thinking about his family, he's thinking of himself. He failed them in his responsibility as the leader. But the truth is, the future of happiness for those that follow us is based upon us making good decisions. Now, I don't know about you, but that weighs very heavily on my heart. I realize, and in fact, in the book of James, the 3rd chapter, he said, don't desire to become a teacher unless you are willing to be judged by a higher standard of judgment. God's going to hold me accountable for more than he holds you at this point in your life. Why? It's because all the people that follow us. I not only am going to give an account to God for myself, I'm going to give an account for the people that believed me, that followed what I said. And I'm judged by a higher standard of judgment. So it's an awesome responsibility. And the only way that we can do it and do it right is become a loving leader. That's what Jesus did, though. He's our example. So follow him and allow him to set that example in your life. May God bless you on your Christian journey as you learn how to become loving leaders.